Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the entertainment headquarters, and welcome to a very special Kaiju Connections. This is my segment on the channel where we talk all things kaiju and monster cinema from, not just cinema and now television, thanks to the Monsterverse. So joining me for this very special Kaiju Connections is a good friend. He is somebody I met when I was at G-Fest in 2023. He's the only other British Kaiju giant monster fan that I've met outside of myself. It's the one and only Daniel Miller.
Hello.
Welcome. And so we are here for a very special reason, and it is because we're here to talk about your favourite film.
Yeah.
Your favourite kaiju film. And I'm talking about Varan The Unbelievable. So, Varan The Unbelievable. So, this film, I believe, came out in 1958.
That's right.
That is the Japanese version of this film anyway. As you can see, that is Varan the Unbelievable, but that is the American poster. And this is the Japanese version, the Japanese poster. So the reason I'm showing two different posters, first and foremost, is because I believe that Varan the Unbelievable, there are two versions. There is the traditional Japanese version, and then a few years later, they brought it over to the Americans, to the American shores, but it was heavily edited and heavily transformed. We know they've done that previously with the Godzilla movies. They've always added like some sort of, American counterpart or a character to a film to try and translate the films more for, a Western audience, somebody they can connect with. So, for example, when it came to the original Godzilla in 1954, they added the actor Raymond Burr to the American version, and then they did that again with the Return of Godzilla, or Godzilla 1985, or 84. I cannot remember, but either way, they've done that. But this time, when they did Varan, they completely transformed the film upside down.
Yeah.
So, to give people a bit of more context, I'll just read a little bit more about Varan, and then my good friend Daniel Miller here, because it is his favourite film, I'm going to allow you to take the floor and talk a lot about it, and I'll interject wherever I can. So, Varan the Unbelievable is a giant monster film based in Japan in 1958, directed by Ishiro Honda. As we all know, he is the master of these movies. He is, somebody that he's basically like the father of the kaiju era, the kaiju genre. He's very much well known. This was his bread and butter. He was, so the special effects were by E.G. Tushabaria. I say I'm crap at pronunciations. Produced and distributed by Toko Ltd. It stars Kozo Nomura and Ayumi Sonoda, and it has Haru Nakajima as Varan himself. In the film, a reporter investigations into two mysterious deaths in Japan's mountains leads to the discovery of a giant lake monster wrecking its way towards civilization. So that is your plot synopsis. So there's like an investigation and of what they believe is, these two mystery deaths. So Take it away, Mr. Miller. Where would you like to?
Sorry, can you say that again?
I said, where would you like to start, Mr. Miller, when it comes to Varan?
Okay, right. When it comes to Varan, I'm going to start a little bit about the backstory of what Varan was originally intended to be. Then I'll talk
Mm-hmm.
about the synopsis, at least of the Japanese version, and I'll briefly go over the American version. So, at some point in the mid 1950s, ABPT Pictures, if that sounds familiar to anyone, it should. They were the same company who were originally going to do an Americanized version of Godzilla Raids Again before they ultimately went out of business. And Godzilla Raids Again, which was originally intended to be the Volcano Monsters, wound up being dubbed over and retitled Gigantis. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
that's so I think that's a separate story. But anyway, ABPT Pictures struck a deal with Toho to produce a science fiction show for American audiences with Japanese special effects used to bring the creature to life. At the last minute, whether ABPT pulled out or they closed shop around that time, one of the two, Toho had to pick up the pieces themselves because of the progress that they already made in terms of the suit design and of course the set design as well, for the miniature sequences. They just couldn't let it go to waste. So ultimately what they had yeah so ultimately what they had was a design that at first it may look generic, but upon closer inspection you can see uh, elements taken from both Godzilla and Rodan sort of
Mm-hmm.
incorporated into the design.
Yeah, he's like a hybrid of the two creatures of Rodan and Godzilla.
Absolutely.
I also think he's got elements of Anguillus there in his design because of the spikes.
Yep.
Yeah, because obviously Anguillus is right here, one of my favorite kaiju.
Yep.
Proudly wear this, proudly like to represent Anguillus. But yes, he definitely has a mixture of all three kaiju designs, and to think that this American company were going to potentially have a television sci-fi show with a creature
Yeah.
that was potentially based on three well-known kaiju uh, creatures, and like you say, for whatever reason the plug was pulled, you never know where that could have went.
No, you don't. And that's one of the many reasons why I like Varan, because I always look at the movie, the Japanese cut sometimes, and I always wonder what could have been if
Mm-hmm.
ABPT didn't go under and we actually saw what this Varan TV show would have been like. And I also think the same thing about the volcano monsters, even though a lot of people will probably have more of a grudge against it than they do Gigantis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, Toho had to pick up the pieces, and of course Ishiro Honda was brought on to direct the human cast, the human characters,
Mm-hmm.
while the
Yeah.
special effects and the score by Akira Ifukube and the special effects held by E.G. Tsuburaya.
Mm. And some of that score we've heard in other movies, you know,
Yes,
as well.
yeah,
It's very much, if anyone owns any of the soundtrack, or if you're lucky enough to own the big multi, you know, CD'd Godzilla anniversary soundtrack pack, which I would love to own, which I would have to pay a saw off my leg and
yeah.
sell it to, you know, on the black market to afford to buy it because it's that expensive.
It probably costs a
It
lot more than that, though.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I've got a thick thigh, so you never know. Uh, but, but what can I say? The music that he created, undoubtedly one of the best sound scores for a franchise. You know, people go on about Marvel and all that, but people need to remember that way back in the 1950s was the height of crazy science fiction,
Yeah,
and the basically the Showa era of the kaiju genre was like the MCU. You had different characters and different monsters cross over into each other's films, and then the ultimate film, which was like their end game, was Destroy All Monsters, which had different creatures from all different eras and genres of the films back in the day.
That's
Uh,
right.
yeah. So, talk to her a bit about the plot of the Japanese version because, like I say, being from the UK, I've only ever seen the American version because we didn't have access back in when I was a younger person back in the day when I wasn't an old fart. When I was a lot younger, and the internet was just starting. I know in the UK, Varan was never released on DVD or Blu-ray. It was only ever got a theatrical release. So it's very hard for us to get our hands on it, except if you have a region DVD player and you got it imported from abroad.
Yeah, that, and also because the Japanese version on DVD with English subtitles has gone out of print, so you have to find it at a reasonable price as well.
Mm,
If you manage to find a copy that's still going,
yes. Well, if you ever find a copy, send it my way because it would be it
will
would
do.
it would be a gem to add that to my kaiju collection. But since I have not seen the Japanese version, like you were about to do, give us, the plot synopsis and the summary of the entire plot for us, please.
Okay, the plot. Okay, so the plot involves two students from Tokyo University who go into the mountain regions of Japan. Specifically, it's what they refer to as the Tibet of Japan because of how
Mm,
unusual an atmosphere it is. They find a rare species of butterfly or moth, and just as they gather a specimen, a giant shadow looms over the mountains, and the two explorers are killed in a rock slide. The
mm,
sister of one of the students who was killed goes out with a pair of, if I remember correctly, news photographers to explore where they were killed. They go out there uh, by bus out to the Tibet of Japan, and it's there they come across the locals performing a ritual in front of a statue of a stone monster holding a human skull, which I think is a really brilliant touch with this sort of god worshipping
mm,
aspect of the Varan character, which looking back at it, I hope they went into that a bit more.
mm.
Anyway,
Yeah, if you look at a lot of the Toho, kaiju movie, there's a lot of like gods. There's a lot of things involved with that. Like for example, King Caesar. He was seen as like a deity to, you had the Saitopian people that worshipped Megalon.
yeah,
So it's nothing new within the kaiju genre that we've got, cultures and different tribes and all of that, and different histories and of civilization worshiping these larger than life characters and beings.
yeah. The original Godzilla did have that as well, with the natives on Odo Island performing that
Hmm.
dance, hoping to
Hmm.
soothe Godzilla's anger.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely, and they even mentioned it in the latest one, Godzilla -1. They kind of
Yeah,
brought it up that the locals on the island knew about Godzilla, and they told they didn't go into great depth about it within the movie itself, but they did bring up that Godzilla existed and they knew of his existence. I do believe in, I think it's the -1 novelization. I think to go more into depth about the connection with the people in Godzilla on the island.
hmm
So where do we go now after the sister decides to investigate the deaths of our brother and his friend?
all right. So the characters that we follow, they're three main characters. I'll just call them the trio,
Hmm.
just for sake of time. The trio find this group of locals worshipping a creature that they call Baradagi. or Baradagi Sanjin, from what I
Mm-hmm.
remember from the Japanese dialect. One of the natives' children has a dog, and it runs off into the woods past a small barricade. And of course, the child runs after the dog. The mother tries, but the old man says that he is condemned because he's entered sacred ground, which is where Baradagi is resting. The trio decide to say, "Are you really going to let this superstition guide you for the rest of your lives? There's a boy beyond there, and he needs to be brought back safely." Of course, some of the uh, locals, it's not an island, some of the locals agree, to help them find the child and the dog, while the old shaman character, he stays behind and does his praying. Eventually, they all find each other, but not before they disturb Varan resting at the bottom of the lake, and he emerges with this wonderful score by Akira Ifukube. It has this really ominous build up to it. Dun 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 dun. And then when Varan emerges, you just have that slam on the piano keyboards, and there's this
Mm-hmm.
really powerful composition that accompanies Varan as he exits the lake and starts to terrorize the people who have intruded on his territory. Now, I just
Mm-hmm.
want to say here the highlights of Varan the Unbelievable, or Giant Monster Varan, or Daikaiju Baran, or whatever you want to remember it as.
Mm-hmm.
The special effect sequences and Ifukube's soundtrack are the highlights of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And
Definitely.
yeah,
And I think a lot of that's lost in the American version because I'll be honest, I
oh yeah,
watched the American version not long before starting this streaming, but the version I watched was quite dark
yeah,
and there was just a lot of explosions and a lot of like things like that. And I just felt like it felt a lot hollower than the film could have been. I felt like it was, it didn't like hit us the way you're talking about this version.
no,
Like you've got like scenes like that of Varan getting ready to fly and stuff like that. It's
yeah.
like,
That was cut from the American version.
yeah, he doesn't actually fly. He's basically just a lake creature or an ocean creature in the American version, which I thought was quite, disappointing. But even the suitmation there looks really, really detailed.
Yeah, I
You
really
know,
do
the
like. Yeah, I really do like the Varan suit in the original, especially with because look at the shell. See how
hmm
this walnut texture complements with the membranes just tucked
hmm
underneath there, and then on
hmm
top of that you have these spikes. Then of course you have the sideburns, which are the
hmm
spikes just underneath Varan's eye. Which,
hmm
fun fact, because Varan was originally meant to be one of the guardian monsters in GMK back in
absolutely.
2001, but
hmm
then and also Anguirus was meant to be in
It's
that
meant,
movie as well.
yeah, it was meant to be Angelis, Baragon, and Varan.
Yeah.
Wanted basically, I think the whole scenario of that movie was going to be like something like, yes, there were the three, gods, guardians, but I think because of the size of Godzilla and how he's so powerful, it would have come across as like a David versus Goliath kind of battle. These three,
Mm,
smaller beings coming together to take on a much bigger, dangerous foe. Um, but yes, so like I say, the detail in the suit in the story already sounds way better than the version that we got in the American one, which, like I say, just felt very hollow and felt like as if they were just trying to recreate the buzz of what they got from Godzilla 1954.
yeah. And the thing is that because in the American story, I'm jumping a bit ahead here. The American cut, it follows a US military commander who, with his wife, are
Yes.
stationed in a small offshore island because they change it from the Japanese mountains to an offshore island. And and they use a new chemical to, I think, sterilize the water in the lake. In the Japanese cut, that was actually the self-defense forces' first act of retaliation against Varan after he rampaged through the village
Mm.
in the Japanese cut. I also want to talk a bit about how each film is presented, because Varan,
Mhm.
the Unbelievable, the American version, it's a cropped pan and scan
Mhm.
presentation.
It doesn't come across that it's got a very strong plot. It feels like it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and they've
Yeah,
put all the bits together to form one film. Where there's no like, it doesn't feel like it's it's it feels badly edited,
yeah,
and it feels as if they didn't know which direction to take the film, and that they were just you know tying it together, putting the jigsaw pieces together as they were editing it
yeah,
with
and
the recreated American scenes that they had filmed.
yeah. And speaking of jigsaws, while the original Japanese version of Varan does reuse stock footage from Godzilla and Godzilla 8 again, I admit that, in the American cut, it's even more extreme because Varan, the Japanese version, only used the military sequences from those movies, like the tanks and the missile launchers, and the occasional building being destroyed. Unbelievable, the American cut goes all out and straight up recycles scenes of some of the side characters talking, but they're not dubbed over. They're speaking in their original Japanese dialect,
Mhm.
which, okay, on one hand, it sort of works given where they are in the world. But on the other hand, it also feels lazy. Like this is just
Mhm.
sloppily put together. And
Yeah,
another
that's
thing
what
is,
I'm saying. Like it just doesn't run smoothly as a film
no,
because of
yeah,
how it's edited. And like you say, it was like they haven't just didn't decide to put it together, or even like you say, even dubbing the scenes with the Japanese original footage or the characters, and they're
no,
just expecting you to just take what's on screen without any explanation. Where
yeah,
today's audience, let's be honest, are quite lazy. They want things quite fast. They want a simple plot, or if they want a complicated. It depends on what kind of audience you are.
yeah,
Like you get those that like the big blockbuster films with simple plots and just heavy effect, heavy. Or you get people who want to see a very strong, complicated film with a great story and great action and great effects. It really just depends what your bag is. You've got Transformers, which is popcorn flicky. Then you've got certain films like I guess some of the the Marvel films where they spend 10 years building a plot together.
yeah.
uh, it really just depends on what you're after.
That's true.
Hmm.
And also, in the American cut, I mean, the movie, it is titled Varan, is it not?
Hmm.
But
Yes.
nowhere in the movie, they never once call him Varan by name. Instead, they just refer to him as Obaki.
Yeah, I remember that. Yes, I
Well,
noticed that.
yeah, I mean, Sid Harris, who I think was the writer on this, your work was half the work was done for you. You just need to use the bloody name in the title. Why did you go for Obaki?
Yes, very
Excuse
true.
me?
So, what other differences would you say are in between the American version and the Japanese version, like plot wise? Because the one you've said it was based in the Japanese mountains in the Japanese version. The American version's based on an island.
Yeah. The the storyline, they do mention the uh the characters in the Japanese cut, the trio, the three main characters, but
Hmm.
they're relegated to a side plot which at least comes up roughly twice, but throughout much of the film it's just completely negated.
Hmm.
In the American version, they try and emphasize a bit of a struggle going on between the natives and the commander, but it's just done like an afterthought and there's not really any effort put into it. You just have one scene of a native clobbering the commander over the back of the head and then running back into the bushes. That's it. Other than that,
Mm.
the natives don't try to stop the experiments whatsoever. Another thing is that all of Akira Ifukube's music, besides a few snippets
Mm-hmm.
of the natives praying to Varan, it's all completely replaced. So too is Varan's roar, his sound effects. That's also completely gone. I think, if I remember correctly, the opening soundtrack is from the original, is from the Incredible Shrinking Man.
Yeah, I'm just reading a little bit about it here. So what I've got, yeah, in 1957, Toho was approached by American Broadcasting Paramount Theatres, which you mentioned, to
Mm.
co-produce a new kaiju film for television. It was intended to be a 3-part film. Each 30 minutes will fade in and out for commercial breaks. However, ABPT collapsed during production, and Toho altered the film's status from a television film to a theatrical feature. As a result, the crew faced difficulties and filming lasted 28 days. The film was theatrically released in Japan on October the 14th, 1958. A
Yep.
heavily localized version with new footage starring Marion Healy in the lead was released in the United States on December the 12th, 1962 by Crown International as Varan The Unbelievable. Varan would later be briefly featured in Destroy All Monsters. Now, this bit I find interesting. So I'm
Yeah.
going to look at the American version. The film was heavily localized for its American release, produced by Jerry A. Bartowitz. Bartowitz also directed new footage with Marion Healy interacting with Japanese American actors. A new story was written by Sid Harris, which featured an American military scientist stationed in Japan conducting a desalinization experiment on the lake where Varan dwells. The American version only features 15 minutes of the original Japanese footage and does not credit any of the Toho crew. Ikefubi's music was replaced with cues from The Amazing Colossal Man.
Oh, that
The
was it.
Yeah, that was it. The American version runs at 70 minutes and was theatrically released on December the 12th, 1962 by Crown International under the title Varan The Unbelievable. It was re-released on a double bill with First Spaceship on Venus. Toho featured the American version in their 1962 and 1963 English sales catalogues. Honda was unaware until the 1980s of the American version's existence. Film historian Stuart Galbraith the fifth claims that an English dub version was produced by Toho. However, evidence of such a version has never surfaced.
No. The same thing for King Kong versus Godzilla. There's an
Mm-hmm.
international trailer which is the original Japanese footage, but it has an English dub track. I mean, that
Yes.
is proof that it may have existed. It might still exist in the Toho vault somewhere, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not available legitimately.
I find it
It's not
very
available at
weird.
all.
I found it very strange that Honda was unaware until the 1980s of the American version existence. So maybe because he didn't know about it and maybe got to view the American version, he was so disheartened with how they basically butchered his film
Yeah,
that when they did, an English dub version of the film, he might have just said, no, just scrap it. They've got their version, they've got the American version.
yeah,
He might have been that disheartened with it and say, right, they've got their version, why bother releasing the version we've got? Which I think if they ever did release an English dub version of the original Japan, I think that would be like the definitive version. I think people would just forget about the American version. It's
maybe.
like it's like everybody was annoyed with Josh Whedon when he
Yeah,
took over directing of Zack Snyder's Justice League. And there's his version, then there's the Snyder Cut. Now, the Snyder Cut by no means is much of a better film in terms of it's not a great film. Like I wasn't really that impressed, but is it superior to the Josh Whedon version of the Justice League? Yes. You get more in depth with the characters, and the story flows much better with the added footage from Zack Snyder. But by means, it's not the greatest of superhero films.
No.
So the fact that they took the version of Varan and they basically butchered it.
Yeah.
They butchered it to create the American version. It wouldn't surprise me, like I say, if Honda was so disheartened with what he's seen of his work, of what he had put together, and the fact that it was meant to be a co-production as well between the Americans and Toho. Maybe he was disheartened with the collaboration or the collaboration that fell through.
Yeah. I mean, after, because before this, I watched the Japanese version and the American version. Sorry, and before I discovered the Japanese version and how it was altered into this, I wondered, wait, how much footage of the original cut is this? Then, after many years of searching, I actually managed to get the Japanese print, and I have to say, I have never seen a movie so far removed from its
Mm-hmm.
original source. I mean, it, I can't even. I'm not sure if it actually qualifies as any version of the original. It only does so, I think, because of the title. If anything, it's its own movie. It's just taken. It's basically taken some of the best moments from this movie, but just turned it into something that's really truncated, incoherent, and just completely. I mean, after trying to rewatch this again, it's very difficult to sit through, and that's saying
Yeah,
something about a
I
film.
have to be honest. That is my exact opinion of the American version. Like I say,
Yeah,
I had it on. It was dark. It was a dark. Uh, it was quite dark, and it was the story for me. It just didn't sucker us in. I just didn't really connect with the story. That in the explosions, and then obviously just seeing Varan being constantly bombarded by missile fire and all this stuff. The plot just for me was just really weak,
they
and
even
it's a
managed to ruin Varan fighting the military in the American version. Just not just because they got rid of Varan's roar, but because of how the film is put together. I don't know
mhm.
if that's because of this particular transfer or if that's how the film was edited back in
Well,
1962.
well,
But
even some of the
oh,
scenes
God,
with Varan and how he looks just doesn't look good. Like you've got this, like I say, you've got these kind of scenes.
yeah,
These just these for me are just they're not seen clearly in the American version.
no, no,
It's
they're
like
not.
it's they're not. It's like that beautiful scene there of Varan taking off and flying around, but he doesn't actually fly in the American version, which is so off-putting, especially if you haven't seen Varan the film, but then you got to see Destroy All Monsters. And yes, he's only in it for a brief second, but there's this scene in colour where you see him fly up off the rock and he flies away.
Yeah,
Like if you weren't to know Varan and you were so curious about him after seeing that scene and you got your hands on the American version, you would probably have a lot of people that were very disappointed.
yeah, that's
And
to say
even
the
the
least.
yeah, and even the American, like look at this. Clearly you can get it. There's Varan the Unbelievable. There's the American poster. So it's clearly shown you him in the water. He's a lake sea monster, and then you've got even the Japanese original poster where you can see him flying around
Yeah,
on the
and
poster. So straight away there's a divide there and then.
yeah, and actually looking at the artwork for the American poster, which I mean, it's a decent enough piece of art for me personally, but
Hmm.
it actually shows that there might have been some semblance of a story. I mean, you have Healy's character here holding on to a woman who I think is his love interest, and there's another woman down here who might be like
Mm-hmm.
a wife or an ex or something, so that hints at a human drama going on. Then you have all these people in the background hinting that, okay, this is an American B
Mm-hmm.
grade monster movie with some semblance of a story.
Mm-hmm.
That's completely false. It's blatantly lied.
Mm-hmm.
I
The thing
mean,
is, there's no real in-depth plot to Varan, the American version. It's basically they do an experiment, they find this creature, we need to kill the creature.
yeah.
It's your stereotypical dumb, you know, man versus beast kind of scenario. And then obviously you have this daft scene here, which 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 is how Varan is killed, I believe, in the film. Because I have to be honest, I started switching off
Yeah.
halfway through the American version.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, in the American cut, they use the sequence. Well, I say use. They've straight up ruined the sequence of the Japanese Navy engaging Varan with this net filled with explosives. They detonate it, and that somehow kills Varan. In the
Mm,
Japanese cut, that's a build up to the final sequence where Varan runs rampant at Haneda Airport, which,
yes.
if you get the chance to see it, the Haneda Airport sequence, that's also another one of the special effects highlights in there for both the suit acting and the miniature destruction work.
It just doesn't make sense why you would butcher a film
No. I mean,
and
in
take these
Mhm.
incredible hard-working scenes that all the creative people behind them put together and not
Yeah,
use them. Especially if you've actually purchased the movie and you've actually purchased the footage. Yes, I know you have to add your New York and your footage, the American footage. But if you look at what they did with, say, Godzilla 1954, that worked. Even the American version, yes, there's differences, but it still, it still features a lot of the monster scenes
yeah,
that they did do. In the same with, I think, is it Astro Monsters, Invasion of Astro Monsters? They had that film and they brought in, the American, uh,
Nick Adams.
yeah, Nick Adams, the actor. They brought him in, and look, that worked wonderfully with
Yeah.
both the Japanese and the American actor. So why couldn't you have done a version of like that with Varan? It just feels like they bought it and they've made it
Yeah.
on a budget, and it's like they didn't really care about it, and maybe they had already, because of the spent money on it because of this parent collaboration.
Mm,
Maybe they just thought, right, we just need to salvage what we can with it, but they could have done a way better job, a way better job.
yeah. It, I, and I mean, the Japanese version, I'm not going to lie, it does have its own set of flaws within its storyline, but the writer who, let me see the credits. Writer.
The writer for the
Oh, yeah.
American version, it
No, I mean
is
the Japanese version. It's
all right.
Shinichi Sekizawa. He did the screenplay. What he did with the human characters is, while they do feel underdeveloped for the most part, he actually gave them uh, some punchy lines of dialogue in some parts of the film, which, despite the human cast, they do come off as the weaker elements of the story in the Japanese version, but they do get the job done
Mhm.
at the end of the
What,
day.
what's one of the biggest complaints we ever get is kaiju fans about kaiju films.
Yeah,
Human plot and human characters.
yeah,
They're underdeveloped, or there's no human plot. There's no plot. It's stupid. Like, look at every time you see a new MonsterVerse film come out lately. Oh, the plot's crap. There's no human characters that we can connect to. There's no one we can root behind. There's always a negative about the human plots and characters within kaiju movies. Where, for
and that's
me,
never going to go away.
you know, because at the end of the day, the humans are the anchors to what we're there for, which is the monster action. Or you can have a great human story, like with Minus One.
Yeah.
Minus One for me was a great story, amazing. Basically, Godzilla became the co-star to the human plot and the human characters. He was the one that anchored it forward. And
Yeah.
even though people moaned about Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, I preferred the human plot in that movie, which was like a coming of age and a discovery of who your identity is, with the character of Jaya discovering her people and reconnecting with her civilization, which she kind of had lost, and her core plot was her connection to Mothra, which added to the monster element of the story. So
Yeah.
you do have human plots, but the people that view these films are not really monster fans, let's be honest. They're not kaiju fans. They look at these things like they're watching, I don't know, they're watching it like they're watching the film Philadelphia. Or they're
Yeah.
watching them, they're thinking of things like, I don't know, Oppenheimer, where they are fully driven human stories with, very in depth human plot. I would love to see that within a kaiju film, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it.
Yeah. Also, the
Uh,
big problem is trying to find the balance
mhm,
between the monster action and the human characters. If it's because there are some ways of doing it which make it work, but there is also a tendency to focus a bit too much on one aspect. As a result of that, the other aspect follows, and there's no way to counterbalance that in some instances.
mhm. Yes, and I personally think out of all the monster films, I think 2014 did it brilliantly.
Yeah.
I think it lost it a bit at the end once Joe Brody had passed away. It did become like a stereotypical monster movie once the family element had passed. I thought the plot within uh, Kong Skull Island was a great human plot. Uh, there were elements of the human plot of King of the Monsters that really, I thought could have been, done better.
It
And
had
like I
something
said,
there.
yes, it did. I think they could have went a bit darker with the plot when it come to the humans in King of the Monsters. And like I say, I like the plot with the humans in Godzilla X Kong. And I think people are going to always say, well, after Minus One, we're never going to get a film like Minus One again. You're very rare that happens, because I think it's once every generation, once every 10, 12 years that we will get a film of that caliber.
Mm.
1954, then 1984, and then we've had to wait all the way to 2023 to get another one. So if people are wanting another Minus One, wait 10 years and you might get one. Uh,
Oh,
but carry on with Varan. What else would you like to see about Varan?
yeah. Well, I'd say about Varan. Okay, what else I want to say? It's it is something not just in terms of its creature design, but I think the very concept it's very unique in the sense that it was originally a a mini series, but then it
Mhm,
fell through. So they had to very quickly make something in
mhm,
order to make up for the production costs. So it was
mhm,
done partially out of desperation.
mhm,
But it succeeded in making back its money. But in doing so, it also showed not only what could have been the original series, but also the potential that was there, but it wasn't properly tapped into, which I
mhm,
think were due to the constraints that they were working in,
mhm.
that they were working with back
Yeah,
in the
and it
time.
originally was going to be a 3-episode miniseries.
That's right.
So you could maybe look at the American version and see how it's been shot together, edited, even though they edited to be a theatrical release. The way it looks, you could think it's like part of a mini series that's just been held together.
Yeah.
because I don't, like I say, I've only seen the American version, but like I say, it was quite dark, the version I've seen, and the plot didn't grab it as, and it just felt like it was just the military versus a monster. It's something we've seen time and time again. There was no real depth in it. There was no characters I really bonded with. Where the Japanese version sounds a hell of a lot better.
Oh, it is. It is. Despite its own set of flaws, it is miles, leagues better, in
Mm-hmm.
fact. And I always find it strange that considering how Varan himself has never really been brought back part post Destroy All Monsters, even though it was just a cameo. But there were always elements of Varan that were brought back in, like Ghidorah from GMK, or in this form from Godzilla Singular Point.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I believe is, I'm sure what I've read is that they were designing Varan and Anguillus for JMK, but what they ended up doing, because they were afraid that the audience wouldn't go to the theatres to see them, they decided to bring back obviously the two of the top five that Toho have, which is Ghidorah and Mothra. And
Yeah,
when they brought in Ghidorah, I'm sure that they had started working on the sculpt of Varan's head. And I'm sure the head that's on the Ghidorah in GMK is actually meant to be a sculpt of Varan's head.
that's right.
So there is part of Varan in the Ghidorah design in GMK.
That's true.
So just like you said, we'll never know what would have happened with the miniseries, the Varan co-produced American Japanese miniseries in the 1950s. We'll never get to know what Varan could have been or could have done within, the other version of GMK.
Yeah. Uh,
Yes.
Again, it's just a lot of what ifs when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to Orion. It's always what ifs because most of the time, because before, I'm not quite sure exactly when this was. It might have been when Varan was used for got to a singular point, or when this figure was
Mm-hmm.
put out by Bandai. It was mostly overlooked as this obscure, uh, somewhat failed spin-off as a culmination of Godzilla and
Mm,
Rodan. But I think now
yeah.
with I think to the figure and people uh, gradually uh, rediscovering the original film, there's a bit more of an appreciation uh,
Mm-hmm.
now than I think there ever was.
Mm-hmm. Like you see, it's just a shame that Varan doesn't get the recognition that he does for being the kind of kaiju. Like I say, I think if anybody is put off by the character, it's because they've seen the American version and they
Yeah,
just think he's just, a popcorn flick. He just think it's a hollow story. They just think he's cannon fodder. They don't realize there is that other version of Varan, and it's just a shame that he doesn't get the opportunity to be appreciated the way he does. The fact, though, that you, Daniel, have made him your favorite kaiju, that there's something about him that just lures you in, is just, and something that you're attracted to with him.
yeah,
You are the hope. The fans like you are the hope that Varan will make an appearance in a future film. And like you
yeah,
say, we just need a director or a writer. Whenever there's another Toho film or another American produced product, whether
yeah.
it's TV or even animation, I'd be quite happy to have another animated Godzilla film. Obviously, the Singular Point show for me was just far too much complicated. And like you say, you have the Gamera series, which wasn't as complicated, that focused on the monster action as well as quite an interesting plot. The plot of Singular point, feature too much science stuff instead of focusing on the monsters.
Yeah,
And
that's
the
where. Oh,
mm,
sorry.
no,
That's where both Singular Point and the Netflix trilogy failed by focusing too much on the sci-fi of it. Where Gamera
mm,
Rebirth succeeds is that it focuses on what made the original, the Showa era Gamera film successful, which was the child-friendly aspects, and it played
mhm,
with that with more of a mature spin at some point because of the
absolutely.
profanity that the kids were saying sometimes.
Mhm,
But yeah, it worked in
mhm.
that regard,
And
and it also
mhm,
brought the kaiju fights back to what made them entertaining back in the day. And with
mhm,
the new CGI, it allowed them to be more visually appealing, more
mhm.
out there, more brutal, and actually have more of an impact.
Definitely. And we've recently just had the Ultraman Rising animated Netflix movie. As you know, because we are, unlucky,
Yeah,
we are from the UK. So guess
yeah,
what, people? We get fuck all.
absolutely.
When we
Shin
get fuck
Ultraman,
all,
Shin
it won't.
Ultraman, when that was
Mhm.
released, it never came to UK.
Nope.
Never, not a single venue.
We have had the Power Rangers. We've had well, it was known as Mask Rider here in the UK. But
Mm.
Kamen Rider, which is obviously massive, and they did the Shin version of that. Um, that was just plonked on Amazon Prime with no promotion, no, welcome saying here it is, all of that stuff. It was just there to watch.
Yep.
So we have never had much Amazon. Sorry, we have not had much Ultraman. But when I went to G Fest last year, I was blown away with how much Ultraman was there. I was really taken aback, and it was nice to see because
Mm.
us UK fans don't. So, of course, once again, an American studio, Netflix, has took the chance on another Japanese property. They did it with Godzilla. They've done it with Gamera, and now they've done it with Ultraman. And because of the success of that movie, the directors of that movie, I was reading an article on a movie site that they really would love to do a Godzilla and Ultraman spin-off film, like a joint crossover film, which I would welcome.
Yeah.
So if they're talking about it and there's a buzz in the air, it could potentially happen. But it also might open the door for them to do another animated, but in the style of the Ultraman Rising of Godzilla. And if they do that, that could open the door forward to see a reappearance of Varan.
I'm hoping that is the case. I'm also hoping that
You
at some point in the Monsterverse, they probably won't do it now because it's long since passed, but maybe if it's in another series of Legacy of Monsters or in another movie, just get Varan in there.
Mhm.
Come on, just come on. He's one of the most obscure kaiju that there are, and Toho, as much as I like Toho, they don't really give him his due
Mm.
necessarily. So, just acquire the rights and just put him
I
in an
think
episode
I think
or leave him in the background.
unfortunately, I think though unfortunately, just like with uh, any of the big Hollywood studios like Disney or
No.
Marvel, uh, Toho only ever seem to focus on the top five, the ones that make
Mm.
the money. Which obviously, as you know, it's Godzilla, it's King Ghidorah, it's Mothra, it's Mecha Godzilla,
Rodan.
and Rodan was brought in because he was a fan favorite,
Mm.
and yes, I guess he is part of the top five. But the other monsters never really see a return. Like I've been hammering for a long time to see Titanosaurus back
Yeah.
because I loved how he in the Showa era had no powers, didn't have laser beams, fire breath, could fly. He was just pure strength and
Yeah.
power. He was the only kaiju in a long time that could go toe to toe with Godzilla without using a laser beam, a fireball, a buzzsaw, you know, he, anything. He just had the whip of his tail that created the wind, the
Yeah.
wind blasts. Outside of that, he was just pure brute strength, and I would love to see a return of Titanosaurus. But who knows? The MonsterVerse, Toho, the world is at our oyster right now because we are living in the new era of, I guess, the kaiju renaissance. You know, the modern day kaiju era, as we talk about, which is thanks to the MonsterVerse.
Yep.
So, to end this off, where would you rate Varan if you had to rate the film? Out of, out
Okay.
out out of 1 to 10.
1 to 10. Okay. I have to say, for the Japanese cut, I'd rate it a solid 8 for me
Mm-hmm.
personally. Great score by Ifukube, great monster design by the production crew, great special effects directed by Tsuburaya, and with the black and white, even in full screen, because this was, I think, if memory serves me correctly, the first movie to be filmed in Toho scope. Because then there
Mm.
was Mothra, then there was King Kong versus
Yes.
Godzilla, then Mothra versus Godzilla. They would all be filmed in Toho scope. I think this was the first one.
Mm.
So that's just one of many milestones
Mm.
in that one. The soundtrack as well,
Mm.
and I also liked it for the possibilities that it could have been if the direction of the human story had a bit more development, if the overall premise was fleshed out just a little bit more, then it might have been a stronger contender, at least in
Mm.
popularity among the
Mm.
other
Yeah,
Toho kaiju.
definitely. Here's a question for you, Daniel, because I
Yeah,
know didn't they bring out a coloured version of Godzilla 1954?
a
I, I'm
colored version.
I'm
Ah,
not I'm not sure if there was, but if there would you want to see a coloured version of Varan?
absolutely, yes. I absolutely would. With a colored version of Godzilla, I mean, they might actually be working on it right now. That might actually be true, or it might be rumor. But I think there is credence to that because back in the Heisei era, before
Mm-hmm.
they put out the trailers for, they had teaser trailers for Biolante through to Destroyer. They had snippets of the original 1954 Godzilla, but they were colorized.
Mm-hmm. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then recently, I don't know if this was just before the pandemic or roughly around that time, Toho put out I think it was a little promotional thing where they were doing the upscaling or the remasters of some of their
Yeah.
original
For
films. So they had
4K.
for the 4K remasters. That's it. They were remastering in 4K, and I think they showed a sample of a colorized section of Godzilla rising up over the mountain on Odo Island.
That's what I saw. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe we might actually get a colorized
Yeah.
version of
Mm-hmm.
Godzilla. We might. Now this is a long shot, and it probably won't happen. But we might get a colorized version of King of the Monsters in the style of the poster just up there.
Oh yes.
Yeah, where instead of
Yes.
being a brown or a charcoal
Mm.
color, Godzilla's actually a green or
Mm.
like a moss, dark moss green color with red spines.
Yes.
That would be interesting to see.
Because I do know obviously SH Monster Art to do a lot of the figures, the figure arts, the
Mm,
detailed Godzilla figure. I know they're bringing out the 70th version of Godzilla 1954 figure, and it's basically it looks like coloured version. It's got the red flames. It's not in black and white because I've got the original black and white figure
yeah,
that they released a while back, and then they re-released the original figure, but they had enhanced it. I think it was more detailed, or they had changed the sculpt. Where I do know this new version, I think it's the same as the redone sculpt or the repaint or the new detail version, but they've made it a colour version for the 70th anniversary. So it
Yeah,
made me think, if they're bringing out a coloured version figure, is there somewhere out there a coloured version of the original 1954?
there might be. There is the Luigi Cosi's Godzilla from 1977, which is the Italian Godzilla of King of the Monsters, but it's been colorized with select gels over entire frames, so it's not painted
Mm,
or colored in professionally. It's just flat colored gels occupying one
mm,
scene. So, for instance, if it's Godzilla running, rampaging through Tokyo, it's literally an orange or a red gel put all over the entire frame.
mm,
It's a very psychedelic colorization, but it's an interesting experiment of one.
mm. Yeah, well, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but I have an original in a frame French Godzilla 1954 poster.
Oh yeah,
Yes, I'll quickly show you.
wow.
So,
Yeah. And speaking of color, hang on, because this ties back to figure arts. Hang on a sec. For those who knew, NECA for a while had the rights to
yes.
Godzilla, and in their run, they did a recoloring of their 54 release. So it also came with a orange flame
Hmm.
as well. And actually seeing it, at first I was skeptical when I saw the pictures, but actually being able to see it in hand, it's like it's actually not that bad. You know,
Mm.
seeing a creature that was all in black and white in this particular kind of color.
Oh, it looks fantastic. Yes. So I'm gonna go back to ratings. So you would rate the original Japanese version a 8. What would you rate the American version?
Oh God, the American. Okay, right. Now this version. I mean, oh,
It's not Varan to me.
no,
It just I haven't, like I say, seen the Japanese version, but just how we have talked about it and talked about the differences in plot, how they've basically hammered and cut out most of the footage. Like I read there, there's only like 15 minutes of footage of the original film in the 70-minute film itself. And like I say, the version I seen was very dark, and it virtually was just explosions after explosions, no real depth, plot, no character development, just a
no.
very stereotypical pass the popcorn and let's see we'll blow up a creature type film. So before you give your rating, because I haven't seen the Japanese version,
Mm,
I'll give you my version, sorry, my rating. And out of 10, because I was very disappointed, I'm only going to give it a 3 out of 10. Because I knew just watching it, there was a better film in there.
yeah, this I would rate. So it frustrates me. I can't put my finger on why, but it just really, really ticks me off. Uh, I'd straight up give it a one.
Well, you're
One.
kinder than me. I give it 3 just because at least there is a version I can watch.
Yeah. I mean,
And, you know, someone went to the trouble to put that thing together. So I was a little bit kinder, but yes, it's very low graded and rated on my list of kaiju films until I get to eventually see the original Japanese version. But Daniel, it's been a pleasure having you on the entertainment headquarters. It's been a pleasure reviewing Ravan on the Kaiju Connections.
yeah.
Now, is there anything coming up with you on your channel, Dan Filming?
Yes, there is. I've put out a teaser for a series of horror stories that are meant to be something to do for Halloween because Halloween is one of my personal favorite things to celebrate, even though there's not much to celebrate out in my neck of the woods.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, hey, I mean, you gotta do it somehow. So while I was putting a marathon of movies to watch throughout the month of October, I was doing some fiction writing, and I was wondering, wait a minute, idea. And yeah, so yeah, I've looked through the projects that sadly haven't gotten off the ground, and then I
Mhm.
took from those because Kevin, you've seen the teaser,
Yes.
yeah, and the house at the end of the teaser, that was something that was an illustration that I drew on an A3 piece of paper, and because I don't have Photoshop, I cropped it out using MS Word. God, that itself is a nightmare. You have no idea what it's like to crop out on MS Word. But yeah, that was all done with MS Word and DaVinci Resolve, and I tried to do something like a haunted house for sale sort of
Mm.
infomercial. That
It
never worked.
very much feels old school, like Twilight Zone, the teaser. If anyone hasn't seen it after this, I am going to put a link in the description to Dan's YouTube channel where you not only can view this amazing teaser that he put together himself, that he
Hmm.
illustrated himself, but you'll also get to see his stop motion films that he did with these figurines, including Varan himself,
Yeah.
who makes an appearance in his stop motion films, which I know is a big passion of yours, doing these stop motion as well as your creative writing. And I
Yeah.
wish you all the best with that in the future. And I know you're good at what you do. So I look forward to the month of Halloween to see what comes up.
Hmm.
As for me on the entertainment headquarters, coming this Friday, we have the Into the Darkness Wishmaster franchise discussion, talking about all four Wishmaster films. We also on Saturday I will be joined by my regular co-host, DJ Anubis, and we will be joined by two special guests, Mr. Jedi Granville and Century of the Sci-Fi Society, and we will be doing a retro classic movie review on Demolition Man. And coming up soon is a brand new segment that I've decided to put together, and I would like you, Mr. Daniel Miller, to be a part of it. And
Ooh.
that is the episodic adventures segment, which is where I will pick a television show that will be between 6, 7, 8, or 10 episodes, and we will review each episode once a week to add a bit of flavour to the entertainment headquarters, because most of it I've done so far has been film reviews, trailer reactions, and just retro discussions, kaiju discussions, and horror discussions. But I would like to bring some flavour to the channel and bring some television content, and I would like you to be a part of it. So it's been a pleasure having you on, Daniel.
Yeah.
Uh, like I
Thank you for
say,
having me.
it's always a pleasure. You're always welcome on the entertainment headquarters. And this has been Varan discussion as well as review.
Hmm.
Looking forward to what comes in October from you. Uh, and keep an eye on the entertainment headquarters for more coming soon. But until then, keep on enjoying your movies, keep on enjoying your television, and keep the kaiju love alive.